Ryan's office revenge. Look, I've been in corporate finance for 20 years, and I can tell you that when your chief legal counsel calls at 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, something's about to go sideways. Sarah Bennett never called anyone before 9, unless there was a fire somewhere that needed putting out. Patrick, can you swing by my office before the morning briefing? Just a quick sync on your Q4 bonus calculation. Quick sync. You know what that means in corporate speak? It means we need to discuss something that's going to mess up your entire day, possibly your entire year. I'm Patrick Morrison, 47 years old, CFO of North Point Defense Systems. We're a Fortune 500 defense contractor pulling in $2.3 billion annually from Pentagon contracts. I started here as a senior accountant right out of my MBA program, worked nights and weekends for 2 decades climbing the ladder. In this business, your security clearance and your reputation are everything. Lose either one, and you're done. My wife Jennifer always jokes that I worry too much about work. But here's the thing. When you're dealing with government contracts, everything has to be perfect. One mistake, and you're not just losing your job, you're potentially facing federal investigators asking uncomfortable questions about taxpayer money. Sarah's office had that corner view of the employee parking lot where people were still stumbling in with their Starbucks, probably dreading another day of spreadsheets and compliance reports. She didn't offer me coffee. In my experience, that's never a good sign. Patrick, there's been an adjustment to your incentive payout this year. HR will walk you through all the details, but I wanted to give you a heads up before you saw the paperwork. What kind of adjustment are we talking about? I kept my voice level, but my stomach was already doing that thing it does when I smell trouble. A reduction. $150K. She said it like she was discussing the weather forecast. It's tied to some prior period corrections we discovered during the government contract accounting review. Prior period corrections. Now, in defense contracting, that phrase can mean anything from innocent bookkeeping mistakes to federal agencies knocking on your door with search warrants. Which specific contracts? The Sentinel series. Your team handled the revenue recognition on those. Sarah's smile stayed perfectly professional, but something in her eyes felt off. Nothing you did wrong, of course, just some compliance issues that surfaced during our SOX review. Here's what you need to understand. I knew every single detail of those Sentinel contracts. My team had spent 8 months making sure every dollar was properly documented for government audit. We'd been through 3 separate reviews with the Defense Contract Audit Agency. Everything was clean. I'll need to see the supporting documentation, I said. Of course, HR has the complete package ready for your review. But here's the funny thing. When I got to HR 20 minutes later, there was no package. Just Rebecca Stone from compensation with a polite smile and a DocuSign link on her computer screen. Hi, Patrick. Sarah said you'd be stopping by to review the bonus adjustment. Everything's ready for your electronic signature. The document was exactly 1 page. No calculations, no contract references, no detailed analysis. Just a single line. Prior period revenue correction per management directive. $150,000. Management directive. Not accounting standard. Not audit finding. Not regulatory requirement. Management directive. Rebecca, where's the backup documentation? The calculation detail? She looked uncomfortable. That's all I have. Sarah said the details are confidential due to the government contract sensitivity. Confidential? Right. I didn't sign anything. Instead, I thanked Rebecca and walked back to my office, my mind already working through the possibilities. You don't survive 20 years in corporate finance without developing a nose for when something doesn't add up. My assistant knocked on my door around 10 a.m. Patrick, Ryan Walsh wants to see you in his office when you have a minute. Ryan Walsh, our CEO. A guy who'd never met a handshake he couldn't turn into a photo opportunity. Never met a government official he couldn't charm over dinner. He'd been running North Point for 5 years, ever since the board recruited him from a smaller defense contractor in Virginia. I grabbed my notebook, force of habit, and headed upstairs to the executive floor. Ryan's office was all polished wood and American flags, with photos of him shaking hands with generals and congressmen covering one entire wall. The kind of office designed to impress government visitors and remind everyone who was in charge. "Patrick, come in, come in. I heard Sarah briefed you on the bonus situation." He gestured to the chair across from his massive desk. "I know it's disappointing, but you know how these government compliance issues can get complicated." "Which specific compliance issues are we talking about, Ryan?" His smile flickered for just a second. "The details are all in the HR documentation. The HR documentation doesn't have any details, just a reference to a management directive. Well, the important thing is we're getting ahead of any potential audit findings, being proactive, you know? Better safe than sorry when it comes to government contracts." Here's what was bothering me. "What audit findings?" "I've been in contact with DCAA throughout the Sentinel contract lifecycle. They haven't raised any concerns." Ryan leaned back in his leather chair. "Patrick, sometimes we have to make adjustments based on information that isn't public yet. The important thing is the company stays protected. Information that isn't public yet. In our business, that could mean anything from pending investigations to classified contract modifications. But it could also mean someone needed $150K moved around quietly and didn't want to explain why. I'd like to review the technical analysis that supports this adjustment," I said. "That won't be necessary. The decision's already been made." "Ryan, as CFO, I'm responsible for the accuracy of our financial statements. If we're booking a government contract correction, I need to understand the underlying basis." His smile disappeared entirely. "The basis is executive judgment. Mine. And I need you to sign that acknowledgement today. Executive judgment. Not audit requirement. Not regulatory mandate. Not contractual obligation. Executive judgment." After I left his office, I did what any good finance guy does when the numbers don't make sense. I started digging. Back in my office, I did what any finance guy with 20 years of experience does when something smells wrong. I started pulling files. The thing about working in defense contracting is that everything leaves a paper trail. Has to. The government auditors don't mess around, and neither do we. I opened our financial close system and navigated straight to the SOX controls, documentation. As CFO, I had read access to pretty much everything financial. The Q4 incentive pool calculation was right there, and here's what made my blood pressure spike. My original payout was showing, clear as day, then right underneath it was a manual adjustment entry from 3 days ago. User ID, R. Walsh, Ryan Walsh, our CEO. Timestamp, 11:47 p.m. After hours, no witnesses, no approvals through the normal channels. Now, let me tell you something about manual adjustments in our system. They're supposed to be rare, like maybe twice a year for genuine corrections, and they always require dual approval, CFO and controller signatures. But this one had been pushed through with CEO override authority. I took a screenshot and saved it to my personal folder on the company drive. Then I dove deeper into the general ledger detail behind that adjustment. What I found made my stomach drop. The entry was simple enough. Debit executive compensation $150K. Credit accounts payable $150K. But when I traced that accounts payable credit, it wasn't sitting in some liability account waiting to be refunded to the government. No, that money had been paid out to a vendor called Pinnacle Consulting Services. I'd never heard of Pinnacle Consulting Services, and after 20 years managing vendor relationships in this company, that was a red flag big enough to see from space. Quick search in our vendor master file showed Pinnacle had been added exactly 6 months ago. No competitive bidding documentation, no statement of work, no deliverables tracking. Just monthly payments of $25K each, labeled as Strategic Advisory Services. You know what strategic advisory services means in our business? It means we can't tell you what we're actually paying for. I've seen it before, usually when companies are trying to hide consulting payments that won't survive scrutiny. Let me do the math for you. 6 payments times 25K equals 150K. Exactly the amount they'd just clawed back from my bonus. My hands were actually shaking as I picked up the phone to call procurement. Hey, this is Patrick Morrison. Can you pull the vendor setup documentation for Pinnacle Consulting Services? I need to review their scope for a financial analysis. Sorry, Patrick. That vendor file is restricted access. You'd need CEO approval to review the details. CEO approval for a consulting vendor. In 20 years, I'd never seen a vendor file that required CEO approval unless it involved classified projects or legal settlements, and I would have known about both. I hung up and sat there staring at my computer screen. Here's what I was looking at. Someone had created a phantom consulting company, been paying it $25K a month for 6 months, and when they needed to balance the books, they'd taken the money out of my bonus and called it a government contract correction. But here's what really got me. They weren't just stealing from me. They were using my name and my reputation to cover it up. Because when the auditors came looking, it would show as a legitimate adjustment to executive compensation, not an unexplained payment to a mystery vendor. My wife called around lunchtime. Hey honey, how's your day going? Jennifer always could read my mood through the phone. We'd been married 18 years, and she knew when something was eating at me. Complicated. Work stuff. The bonus announcement was today, right? How'd we do? That was the question I'd been dreading. See, we'd been planning to use my bonus to pay down our mortgage. Jennifer had been talking about maybe taking that European vacation we'd been postponing for years. Our daughter Jessica was starting her junior year at Stanford. $60K a year in tuition that wasn't getting any cheaper. There's been some kind of adjustment. Still sorting through the details. Silence on the other end. Jennifer knew me well enough to know that sorting through the details meant I'd found something wrong and was about to go into full investigation mode. Patrick, please tell me you're not about to turn this into one of your crusades. She wasn't wrong to be worried. 3 years ago, I'd discovered some questionable travel expenses by our VP of sales and spent 2 months building a case that eventually got the guy fired. Jennifer had watched me stress myself into insomnia over that one. It's not a crusade, Jen. It's just, the numbers don't add up. How much are we talking about? 150K. Another silence. Longer this time. Patrick, that's not pocket change. That's Jessica's tuition for 2.5 years. I knew that. Trust me, I knew that. But I also knew something else. If I signed that acknowledgement without understanding what was really going on, I'd be signing my name to something that could destroy my career if it ever came to light. I need to make some calls, I told her. I'll explain everything tonight. After we hung up, I called our external auditor. These are the guys who certify our financial statements every year, and they know our government contracts inside and out. Hey, this is Patrick Morrison at North Point. Quick question about your Q4 review work. Did your team identify any revenue recognition issues on the Sentinel contracts that would require adjustment? No, Patrick. Those contracts were actually some of the cleanest we reviewed. Documentation was excellent. Revenue recognition was textbook perfect. Why do you ask? Just following up on some internal discussions. Thanks for checking. Clean. Our external auditors, the same people who'd been crawling through our books for months, found absolutely nothing wrong with the contracts that supposedly required a 150K correction. I sat back in my chair and tried to think through what I was really dealing with here. This wasn't some accounting error or legitimate compliance issue. Someone was moving money around and using my compensation as the mechanism to hide it. The question was, what was I going to do about it? My computer pinged with a new email. Subject, line, urgent. Bonus acknowledgement required. It was from Sarah Bennett. Patrick, we need your signed acknowledgement by end of business today to close the payroll cycle. Please let me know if you have any questions. End of business today. They were putting a deadline on it now, trying to pressure me into signing without doing my due diligence. That's when I knew I needed help. And I knew exactly who to call. Kevin Rodriguez had been on our board for 8 years, chairman of the audit committee for the last 3. Retired Air Force general with 30 years in military procurement, the kind of guy who'd seen every accounting trick in the book and had zero tolerance for corporate games. If anyone would give me straight talk about what I'd stumbled into, it was Kevin. I opened the board portal and pulled his contact info. Then I drafted what might have been the most important email of my career. Kevin, I need a confidential conversation about a potential internal controls issue I've discovered. Can you call me on my direct line when you have a few minutes? This is time sensitive. He called back in less than 10 minutes. That told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he took potential control issues. Patrick, what's going on? Kevin, I've discovered what appears to be a systematic misuse of corporate funds disguised as an executive compensation adjustment. Someone's been making payments to a vendor with no documented scope of work, and when they needed to balance the books, they reduced my bonus by the exact same amount and labeled it a government contract correction. Silence on the other end. In my experience, when Kevin Rodriguez goes quiet, it's because he's thinking through the implications of what you just told him. How much money are we talking about? $150K that I can document. But Kevin, if they're doing this with my bonus, there's probably more. Send me everything you have. Do not discuss this with anyone else until we talk. And Patrick, don't sign anything. Don't. Spent the next hour putting together a comprehensive package. Screenshots of the manual adjustment entries, vendor setup information for Pinnacle Consulting, the timeline of payments, email exchanges with HR and procurement. Everything organized chronologically with a cover memo explaining what I'd found. As I was finishing up, my phone rang. Jennifer again. Patrick, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. How bad is this $150K situation? Here's the thing about being married to someone for 18 years. They know when you're downplaying something. And Jennifer had learned to read the signs of when I was about to dig in my heels on a principle, regardless of the personal cost. It's complicated, Jen. It's not just about the money. It's about what the money represents. What do you mean? I mean someone's been stealing from the company and using my name to cover it up. If I sign their acknowledgement, I become complicit. If this ever comes to light, my signature is on the document that says I approved it. But if you don't sign it, what happens to your job? That was the question keeping me up at night. I don't know. But I know what happens to my reputation if I sign something fraudulent and it gets discovered later. Patrick, we have a mortgage. Jessica's tuition is due in 3 months. Your pension doesn't vest for another 8 years. Are you really willing to risk all of that? She wasn't wrong to be concerned. We had a good life, 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, 2 cars, solid retirement savings. But all of it depended on my income from North Point. And in defense contracting, once your reputation gets damaged, it's hard to recover. Nobody wants to hire a CFO who can't get security clearance. Jen, what if I told you that the right thing to do and the safe thing to do were completely opposite? I'd tell you that you've been in corporate finance too long if you think there's no middle ground. But here's what she didn't understand. In finance, there often isn't a middle ground. Numbers either add up or they don't. Controls either work or they fail. And when someone asks you to sign your name to something, you're either vouching for its accuracy or you're not. After we hung up, I sent Kevin the documentation package and waited. An hour later, he called back. Patrick, this is more serious than I initially thought. I'm calling an emergency audit committee meeting for tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I want you to document any additional contact from Ryan or Sarah about signing this acknowledgement. What should I tell them if they pressure me? Tell them you're reviewing the documentation with your personal attorney. That'll buy us time. Personal attorney. I didn't have a personal attorney. But I knew Kevin was giving me language that would make Ryan think twice about pushing too hard. The next morning, I got to the office early. 6:30 a.m., building almost empty except for security and the cleaning crew. I wanted some quiet time to think through what was about to happen. My computer showed 3 new emails from Sarah Bennett, all marked urgent. The subject lines told the story. Bonus acknowledgement. Response needed. Payroll cycle. Closing and today, and finally please call ASAP. I didn't call. Instead, I did something I'd never done before in 20 years with the company. I forwarded all 3 emails to my personal Gmail account. If this thing went sideways, I wanted my own copies of everything. At 8:45 a.m., Ryan Walsh appeared at my office door. No appointment, no heads up from my assistant, just showed up like he was doing a casual walk-by. Patrick, I understand there might be some confusion about the bonus adjustment documentation. Sarah mentioned you had some questions. That's right. I'm having my attorney review it before I sign anything. Ryan's expression shifted. Not angry, exactly. More like he was recalculating something. Your attorney? Patrick, this is really just a routine accounting adjustment. I'm not sure why you'd need legal review for standard corporate paperwork. Anytime I'm asked to acknowledge a $150K adjustment without supporting documentation, I consider that significant enough for legal review. The supporting documentation exists. It's just confidential due to the government contract sensitivity. Then I'll wait until it's declassified or until my attorney advises me it's safe to sign without reviewing the backup. Ryan stood there for a moment, and I could practically see the wheels turning. Finally, he said, Patrick, I need you to understand that delaying this creates problems for the entire finance team. Payroll cycles have deadlines. I understand that. But I also understand that my signature carries personal liability. After he left, I sat there wondering if I'd just ended my career at North Point. But then I thought about something my father had told me years ago when I was starting out in business. He said, Son, your reputation takes 20 years to build and 5 minutes to destroy. Never put your name on something you can't defend. At 10 a.m. sharp, my phone rang. Kevin Rodriguez. Patrick, the emergency audit committee meeting is starting now. We're bringing in external counsel and forensic auditors. This is bigger than just your bonus. That's when I knew there was no going back. The emergency audit committee meeting lasted 4 hours. I wasn't in the room. Conflict of interest, since it involved my compensation. But Kevin called me afterward with an update that made my head spin. Patrick, the forensic auditors found something. Pinnacle Consulting Services is a shell company, owned by Ryan's brother-in-law, Michael Walsh. The strategic advisory services they've been billing for, consulting payments to Ryan's son's private equity firm. I sat down hard in my desk chair. You're telling me Ryan's been using corporate funds to capitalize his family's investment business? That's exactly what I'm telling you. And it gets worse. The total scheme over the last 18 months was $1.2 million. Your bonus reduction was just the latest funding mechanism. $1.2 million. Suddenly, my $150K didn't seem like the main event. It was just a footnote in a much bigger story. Kevin, what happens now? Now we contact the FBI. This isn't just corporate misconduct anymore. It's wire fraud involving government contractor funds. And Patrick, you need to understand something. If you'd signed that acknowledgement, you would have been legally certifying that the adjustment was legitimate. Your signature could have made you an accessory. That night, I drove home in a daze. Jennifer was waiting in the kitchen with a bottle of wine and a look that said she'd been preparing for bad news all day. How bad is it? She asked before I'd even taken off my jacket. It's bad for Ryan Walsh. It's good for us. I explained everything: the shell company, the family connections, the $1.2 million in diverted funds. Jennifer listened without interrupting, which is how I knew she understood the gravity of what I'd stumbled into. Patrick, what if you hadn't noticed the adjustment? What if you'd just signed it like everyone else probably would have? Then I'd have been complicit in federal wire fraud without even knowing it. And when the FBI investigation started, and it would have started eventually, my signature would have been Exhibit A in their case. The investigation took 8 weeks. The external forensic team traced every payment, every false invoice, every manipulated entry. Ryan had been incredibly sophisticated about it, using legitimate vendor payment systems, proper authorization codes, realistic billing descriptions. The only mistake he'd made was getting too greedy and using my bonus as a funding source. During those 8 weeks, Ryan and Sarah both took temporary leave while the investigation continued. The board brought in an interim CEO from outside the company. I kept doing my job, but now I was also working closely with FBI agents who treated our conference rooms like their satellite office. The day they arrested Ryan Walsh, I was in my office reviewing quarterly projections when Kevin called. Patrick, it's over. Ryan and Sarah were taken into custody this morning. Federal charges: wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. The Department of Justice is also investigating whether any defense contract funds were involved, which could add additional charges. What about the company? Are we going to survive this? The board voted last night. They want you to take the CEO position on an interim basis while we search for a permanent replacement. I thought about that for exactly 30 seconds. Kevin, I appreciate the confidence, but no. I'm a finance guy, not an operations leader. Bring in someone from outside the defense industry. Fresh perspective, clean reputation. What about you personally? Are you staying with North Point? That was the question I'd been wrestling with for 8 weeks. I want to restructure my role, create a new position, Chief Risk and Compliance Officer, same compensation as CFO, but focused entirely on preventing this kind of thing from happening again. The board agreed immediately. They also gave me something I hadn't asked for: a formal commendation for exemplary professional conduct in identifying and reporting potential fraud. It went in my personnel file and my security clearance documentation. 6 months later, I was sitting in a congressional hearing room, raising my right hand to be sworn in before a House subcommittee on defense contract oversight. The room was packed with reporters, defense industry executives, and government officials. The questioning was tough, but fair. Congressman David Martinez from Texas asked the question I'd been expecting. Mr. Morrison, why did you risk your career and your family's financial security to expose this fraud? Congressman, with respect, I didn't risk my career. I protected it. After 20 years building a reputation for integrity in this industry, I wasn't about to let someone else destroy it by making me complicit in federal crimes. But surely you considered the personal cost of challenging your CEO? I looked directly into the camera that was broadcasting the hearing live. Congressman, the personal cost of doing the wrong thing would have been much higher. My signature on that acknowledgement would have made me a co-conspirator in a $1.2 million fraud scheme. That's not a risk. That's career suicide. The subcommittee's final report praised North Point's internal controls response and recommended our new compliance framework as a model for other defense contractors. A year after that congressional hearing, Ryan Walsh was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for wire fraud and conspiracy. Sarah Bennett got 3 years for her role in the cover-up. Both lost their professional licenses and their security clearances permanently. I kept my job, my clearance, my reputation, and my family's respect. But more than that, I learned something that changed how I think about corporate leadership and personal responsibility. My father had been right about reputation taking 20 years to build and 5 minutes to destroy. But he'd missed the other half of the equation. Sometimes protecting what you've built requires being willing to risk it all for principle. And when you're faced with that choice, all those years of experience don't just guide your decision, they give you the courage to make it. The real measure of a successful career isn't what you accumulate over the decades, it's what you refuse to compromise when tested. That's the difference between building a career and building a legacy worth defending.